very kind introduction. You mentioned that I had operated 3 major league clubs, which is not quite accurate. I did own the Cleveland Ball Club and the Chicago White Sox, but I don't think you can quite classify the St. Louis Browns as a major league team. and after you've operated the Browns, you feel yourself somewhat ill at ease with a crowd. In St. Louis, we played secret games. For a crowd this large, we'd have played a doubleheader. and of course, I'm ill at ease because I'm here under false pretenses. When I accepted this invitation, I really anticipated appearing as the commissioner of baseball. But a little something went wrong, like 20 votes. Of course, it does seem strange also that you would invite a 4-time dropout to address you at your convocation. A couple of times were voluntary, too. By the same token, you have made things very easy. I really thought, too, when I arrived in the Twin Cities area that I would discuss winning. After the University of Minnesota and the Vikings and the Twins and your club, I'm here tonight, or this morning, I should say. Gee, it's a terrible mistake. There must be something, Freudian about it. Anyhow, I'm here representing losers. Without losers, you can't have very many winners. So I'm representing that outstanding Olympic diving champion, Sonny Liston, and that great master of finance, Bobby Baker, and the greatest of all sales ladies, Christine Keeler. And in other words, I'm building character. It isn't whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Well, I can tell you it gets damn tiresome. I am, of course, well qualified to discuss losers. I'm the only one who couldn't buy the Washington Ball Club. Of course, I'm the only one stupid enough to want to, too. But there is a slight difference between winning and losing, other than eating. And first I should preface this, I don't want you to think for a moment that I think that winning is the most important thing. I don't. I think it's the only thing. Otherwise, why keep score? But the difference is probably most easily explained in 1959 by some strange quirk of fortune. We managed to win the American League championship, and I was invited to speak at the New York Baseball Writers' Banquet, which is the most prestigious affair of its kind in our racket business. Oh yes, game, and it was really remarkable for me to look out of this audience of 1,000 fellows in dress suits, dress clothes, and I thought, isn't it great? 1,000 waiters for one guest, and I found afterwards that the people were so very kind, and I thought, isn't it great to have so many friends? And then we made the mistake of opening the 1960 season. And the Yankees came to town, and I want you to understand that those are the old Yankees, not to be confused with this year's CBS summer replacements. And we played a 4-game series. We lost the first 3, and then we blew the 4th one as a pitcher's battle. We lost that 8-1. And I thought, Well, afterwards, I thought I'd call my wife, Mary Frances, whom I was certain would still be speaking to me because she's an old-fashioned squaw. The kind that, when you go home, she has the air conditioning on, and she has the can of beer open, and my slipper, and water's warm because she knows how I hate to do dishes in cold water. And I thought I'd call her, and I suddenly found I didn't have any money. So I saw one of our season seat box holders coming down the steps, and I charged over, and I said, I wonder if I could borrow a dime. I'd like to call a friend. And he says, here's a quarter, call them all. There is a slight difference in winning and losing. And I kind of like to talk a little bit about the Browns because I feel quite safe because I know that none of you ever saw them. Brownie fans were exactly like brownies. You know they're all around, but you never do see them. And we had one thing in St. Louis that was better than anyone else. We had, without question, the greatest performer that ever walked onto a baseball diamond. The same ancient and venerable gentleman, Leroy Satchel Paige, who, last year at the age of either 67 or 68, and no one is quite certain exactly how old he is, I saw pitch 4 times. And he pitched 13 innings. He allowed 4 hits, struck out 12, and walked no one. Of course, allowed no runs. At 68, remarkable fellow. He's the kind of a pitcher you like to have on your team. He's a winning pitcher. And when you've been pitching 50 years, you know a little way, a few ways to work at winning. I wouldn't say he'd do anything dishonest. Father, forgive me, that's a lie. He had 20 deliveries, none of them legal and none quite illegal. He'd take that extra step off the mound and say, sorry, I didn't know you couldn't do that in this league. In the meantime, you're out. It got so the umpires used to search him when he'd come on the field. I remember one night he was playing the Yankees. We had to, there was no way out. And we'd put on a tremendous rally. In the 8th, we scored a run. It was novelty night. And 3 base on balls in the wild pitch, we were killing them with power. And we had our ace going for us, a fellow by the name of Tommy Byrne. And some of you remember him as a left-hand pitcher. And that'll give you a rough idea of our pitching staff. And he walked out to pitch the first of the 9th against the Yankees, looked at the scoreboard where we were leading 1-0, and immediately went into shock. And he proceeded to walk the first 3 hitters and had 3 balls on the next hitter. And then our manager, Marty Marion, who was very, very sharp in our club, and he figured maybe he's lost his stuff. I know. As I say, we were very quick, and he waved for Satch to warm up in the bullpen. Leroy warmed up in a hurry. He shook hands with the catcher, and as he came by third base, Rizzuto was standing on third base, and he's jumping up and down with all the enthusiasm of the old Yankees and all that garbage. And as he came by, he stopped. He said, "Mr. Rizzuto, sir," he said, "Mr. Rizzuto," he said, "Sir," he said, "if you want to last in this game," he says, "like I have, I suggest you rest whenever you get a chance." He said, "That's the way I've lasted." He says, "What I'm trying to say is, sit down, little man." He says, "You ain't going nowhere." He then proceeded to strike out the side on 10 pitches. Page also had another characteristic that I've noticed in all good performers, whether they be athletes or anything else. He had tremendous self-confidence. Not a braggart, just confident. There may have been good hitters, he just never happened to see him. And it's kind of interesting that DiMaggio, in 56 times at bat, got 2 scratch hits off Page. And Williams, who was the best left-hand hitter that I've ever seen, got 1 hit in 41 times at bat. And I'd say to Leroy, I always addressed him very formally because he was supporting us all. And I said, "Leroy, how come you get those Humpty Dumptys out? I mean, those good hitters out, but the Humpty Dumptys belch you around?" And he said, "Burrhead, you can see where the balance of power lay. He said, that's simple. He says, those are the bums I want to keep in the league. And I said, now how about the good hitters? He says, that's simple too. He says, those is my equals. And this is the way he approached things. A remarkable, really a remarkable fellow. And he fitted in so well in St. Louis. Because you see, in St. Louis, we were completely unlike a major league team. We used sportsmanship. Sportsmanship is a great deal cheaper than good ball players. For instance, we had a screen in right field that you moved up and down depending on which team you're playing. And our club wasn't very fast afoot, so we put enough sand on the baselines. If we can't run, why let anyone else? Or you take our third baseline, and Rizzuto was then the best bunter in baseball, and he'd bunt that ball straight down the third baseline and suddenly roll foul. I can assure you, those things don't just happen, you know. and that I refer to as sportsmanship. I don't want you to think for a moment that the Browns were the only club with which one had trouble. When I owned the Cleveland Club and worked for Bob Feller, he was pitching a ball game in Boston one night, and the first hitter, Dominic DiMaggio, hit the first pitch in the left field for a base hit. The second hitter, Pesky, hit the first pitch in the left field for a base hit. The third hitter, Junior Stevens, hit the first pitch against the left field wall. And Williams, the fourth hitter, hit the first pitch over the right field wall. 4 runs, 4 hits, nobody out. And we had a very alert manager in that club, too, Louis Boudreau. And he started out to the mound to try and find out what had happened. And he couldn't get a hold of Feller, who was wandering around looking for some place to hide. So he went to our catcher, Jim Hegan. He said, Jim, he says, what's the matter with this guy? Has he got anything in the ball? And Hegan looked at him a second, said, hell, I know, Lou, I haven't caught the damn thing yet. Now, I should like to be here this morning to tell you that all is just dandy in the wondrous world of baseball. But then I'd like to come back again, too. And the two don't quite go together, because in reality, baseball is in considerable trouble. Despite the increasing attendance figures, I don't think that this really gives a true picture. Frankly, the game has become dull. And this is sad. I want you to please understand that I happen to think that baseball is the greatest game there is, and probably the most important team game in the country, for 2 reasons. First, it has to be the greatest to withstand what we have done to it. And second, it is the most important because it's the only game left for humans. You see, to play basketball today, you have to be 7'2", and to play football, you have to be the same width. And the only game left for people is baseball. But it has become dull. In the recent World Series, there were 2 exciting innings. The first inning of the first game and the last inning of the last game. And in between that, those 2 innings, it was pretty boring. Of course, the Dodgers helped that, I'm happy to say. They proved how accurate the Baltimore scouting reports that the Dodgers had but one weakness, a pitch ball. But we do so many things in baseball because of tradition. And tradition is a wonderful thing, provided it doesn't become a millstone around the neck of progress. And one of the big differences between the soaring popularity of football and the reduced popularity, I'm afraid, of baseball is the unwillingness of baseball to make any great changes, improvements. For instance, in football, in the last 25 years, you used to have to be 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage in order to pass. Now you can pass from the line of scrimmage, even if you can't find it. You used to be on the sidelines, you had to waste a play running the ball out of bounds. Now they move the ball in so that your offense can flow freely each way. They have offensive and defensive units. They have specialists. They move the goalpost on to the goal line in professional football. Each one of these changes was calculated to make the game more interesting from the spectator standpoint. Now, I was unfair a moment ago because we haven't stood still in baseball. We too have made some tremendous strides. Oh yes, yes. I'm sorry. We took the collars off the uniform, and you can't leave your glove in the field. And there's another one that escapes me at the moment. It's kind of like I talk about the dullness. The average game now runs 32 minutes more, and yet we manage to score 25% fewer runs. And almost half of those runs are scored on home runs, which is the easiest way to score runs and the quickest. And it's kind of like I have a great many youngsters, and they're these first communal job in our contribution to our communal living of these kids. The littlest one, he started 3, is to run beer for the old man. And when we're watching on television, I said, "Now look, don't get a can of beer now. The commercial's on. There's some action. What? Wait till the game starts and we got time, you know." And I kid about it, but it's true. Look at the things we do because of tradition. After every out, you throw the ball around the infield. Well, if your infielders aren't warmed up by the 4th of July, when do you think they might be ready? Or you take a relief pitcher who stands out there, he warms up for 8 innings, and now he suddenly makes his triumphant appearance and he has to warm up a little more. Why not be ready? In this 32 minutes, this extra time, greatest part of it is because of the home run. Now that sounds silly, but it's true. You see, some years ago, we found that a fellow by the name of Babe Ruth could build Yankee Stadium by hitting the ball out of the ball yard. And so, naturally, all operators figured if one fellow like Ruth can build a ballpark, then 8 of them would build a lot of ballparks. And so, we made the ball a little faster. A little faster. If you grasp it tightly in your hands, you can feel the pulse. And as a result, it means that every pitcher has to work on every hitter today as if he were Babe Ruth. Because it's no longer just the paragons of power, the Greenbergs and the Ruths and the Foxes and the Williams that hit the ball out of the ball yard. Albie Pearson will hit 10. That midget would have hit a half a dozen at least. And I might clarify one thing. Eddie Goodell, my little man, was not a gag at all. He could do something that no one else in the Browns could do. He could get on base. And if I'd had any courage, I used 8 of them, we might have won a game. He had an 1.5-inch strike zone. This propensity for home runs means that there are now 40% more 3 and 2 counts, 40% more base on balls, 500% more relief pitchers, and I presume 10,000% more conferences. None of these are calculated to add any excitement or interest to the game. Now, I wish that I could provide the answers to how to rectify this. But we have selected a new commissioner recently, whose name escapes me at the moment. Anyhow, General Eckert, that's the fellow, General Eckert. And I hope that he will, after having taken his first year practicing, will address himself to the problem of restoring the interest and excitement in the game. In the wholly subsidized minor leagues, we have a perfect testing ground. And maybe we should have 3 balls and 2 strikes. Maybe we should have an offensive and a defensive unit. Certainly we should have a permanent pinch hitter for for the pitcher. Maybe we should have a wider plate. There are a great many things that can be experimented with, but baseball has so far studiously opposed any change at all in the rules. As a matter of fact, all college baseball uses more enlightened rules than do the professionals. And I think that it becomes obligatory on the part of the commissioner to put into effect a program of improvement. I really didn't mean to get carried away about baseball. I actually came here to ask a couple of favors. And maybe you can help me. Baseball is a team game, and yet it's the only team game which is an individual performance. Everything you do in baseball, you do alone. There is no concerted action other than a double play. And baseball is, to some extent, a microcosm of our society. And you notice that there used to be a time where on every ball club in the country there was at least one, and usually two or three, exciting individuals, different people. Not sometimes very difficult to describe why they were different, but yet they had that indefinable thing called color. And baseball is losing that. There are fewer individual players. Ball players today, don't misunderstand me, are physically better. They perform with more skill. As the ball is speeded, they have to be more agile. But they don't have the fun of playing, and they don't impart the excitement because there are fewer individuals. Individuals are frowned on in baseball, as I'm afraid they're becoming frowned on in our society. And in this homogenized, pabulumized, mechanized world we're facing, it's very important that the human animal remain a human, an individual. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are the ones who are most responsible and have the greatest voice in whether we will become a herd of sheep, or whether we'll be a herd of individual. Each one has his own human dignity to protect. It's very difficult to do that in the machine age. And yet the machine age, with their weird machines and their silly punch buttons, are going to provide for you the opportunity to be individuals, because they're going to provide more spare time, more time for individual pursuit. And one must work at individual pursuit just as much, because you're going to have so much more of it, just as strenuously as working at your educational facilities. Because you are, in the long run, going to have to fill in a great many hours as we go from an 8-hour day to a 6-hour day to probably a 4-hour day and a 4-day week. There's a lot of time to spend, to fill. And you must, as I say, protect your individuality. I'm all in favor of marching for anything, provided you don't let your marching become a form of confirmation rather than an individual desire. For instance, if you want to march, I'm going to announce my candidacy for president, only because to become president you only have to have one large minority group. And I represent the largest minority group without a voice. I'm left-handed. We're the most abused people in the world. And I always tried to help with the various social programs, but what has Reverend Martin Luther King ever done for us? It's time for us to strike out on our own. For instance, when did you ever hear anyone say that he was leftist? No, they say he's a righteous man. And what do you think? Look how stupid we're considered. Take your automobile. The only thing they give us to work with is the emergency brake. And you never say, yes, you're left. Oh, no, you say you're right. It's a frightening thing. Did you ever try to wind your watch in a phone booth? Try it sometime. It's made for right-handed people. We're not even supposed to know what time it is. And we're all supposed to be constipated. Think of the Johns. So if you have any marching to do, please do it. Please do it in our behalf. Left-handers of the world, arise. You have nothing to lose but your worthless rights. Now, I was talking about the opposition to bigness, and the fear that bigness will engulf us all. You have to fight against this. You have to fight, as we find in baseball, it's more difficult to have large corporate entities owning ball clubs. because they're less interested in individuals and less interested in the individual play than, CBS, well, whatever's happened to them is absolutely delightful in baseball. I wire the Yankees once a week all summer. Deepest sympathy in your hour of need and those kind of encouragement. But bigness is frightening. And so I would like, do inserts in magazines annoy you? Those cardboard things that make you turn to wherever they want you to turn? Well, if they do, I presume then you tear them out and throw them away. But please don't do that. Tear them out and mail them in. This cost the company 5 cents. And there's nothing that shocks them more than paying 5 cents. And then fill them in first. Write in George Washington, Mount Vernon. George Custer, Monroe, Michigan, Abe Lincoln, Springfield. Now they got to get psychiatrists for these silly machines. It's kind of like, and I remember this from last time I was in Minneapolis. At last Christmas, I had a lot of these kids, and one small one, and I got one of my Christmas presents for the youngest one was a hobby horse on springs. It bounced up and down. You've seen the things. So Christmas Eve, I was going to put it out under the tree, and I suddenly discovered that it was in a big box. It was unassembled. And it had on the front a sign, 189 different parts. They were great. They were just happy about this. And underneath it said, in smaller letters, you can put this together in an hour. Well, sure you can if you're just graduated from MIT or, have a machine shop in the basement. I got the thing together at 5 o'clock in the morning, stoned. And I thought, I don't have to accept this kind of an indignity. And so in retaliation, when it came time to pay for it, I tore my check in 189 parts. And I mailed it to him, and I said, if you creeps like to put things together, work on this. But the most disturbing thing is they did. Wherever you see bigness, and bigness that is just steamrolling because of bigness, fight. Don't accept it. Maintain your individuality. Maybe you'll be known as a screwball or something, so what? But at least you have the inner feeling that you have at least asserted yourself. Don't forget, do it. Now, I have one other thing to ask. And if our theories of education are accurate and right, and I'm sure they are, and at least hopeful, we don't educate youngsters in grammar school or semi-adults in high school or adults in college just for that period of time. We educate them for the next 50 years of their life. And if this is true in education, then it is certainly true in athletic education. And there is a grave danger in the country today to make a fetish of team games. Now, this is heretical for me to say because I have avoided working all these years because of team games. But it is true. We call football and baseball to some places, but certainly basketball, major sports. And we give large letters. And all other sports are minor sports. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not advocating in any way de-emphasizing team games. Team games provide a certain form of education, athletic education, that you can secure in no other way than war. The willingness to depend on someone else to be at the right place at the right time. Team play. And they are important. But on the other hand, bear in mind that individual sports, those that you can do the next 50 years, are equally important. Because team sports, well, unless you're president of the United States, it's rather difficult the day after you're graduated to get 22 fellows together for a little game of football, or 10 fellows who just happen to have a gym on their back. And so your participation is ended the day you're graduated. And it's important that side by side with team sports, and of equal importance, not minor, equally as major, be those things that you can do yourself the rest of your life. Whether it be swimming, golf, tennis, it makes no difference. bowling, anything that you can do and have enjoyment, because you, as I said earlier, are going to have more time to do this. And it's important that you have an individual form of athletic activity, because in the long run, these also teach things that have become increasingly difficult to find, like a willingness to make a decision, any kind of a decision, individually. Decisions in industry and so on now are made collectively by groups, so no one can get the finger put on them as to who made it. But in an individual game, you have to make the decision yourself right then, and it's important. And so I'm hopeful that at Augsburg and every other school, they'll require equal time. For every hour of team sport, there should be an equal hour of individual sport. And of the two, who says which will pay off most? But certainly, the individual sport won't be the loser. And as I say, I shouldn't have said that, because it's become so difficult already to get ball players. It's kind of like I had working for me in Chicago a scout, Dizzy Trout. And he brought into the ballpark in Chicago the kind of a kid you wait all your life to see come through the portals. He was so big that he had to come through sideways. And I figure I've gotten to be a reasonable judge of the male animal on the hoof. And I said to him, I said, young man, you must be about 6'3". He says, no. He said, I'm 6'7". And I said, well, you weigh what, around 230? He said, no, I weigh 275. And I said, well, that size and build, undoubtedly, you're a catcher. He says, no. He said, I play in the outfield. I said, how well did you hit? He said, I had a fair year. I hit .595. This is more than our whole club. And I said, do you play any other position? He says, yes, I'm also a pitcher. I said, what kind of year? He said, fair year. I won 9 and didn't lose any. Pitched 5 no-hitters and 4 one-hitters. Well, you know, with bonuses, I, of course, changed the subject. And I said, do you participate in any other sport? He said, yes, I'm also a track man. Well, now I know I've got him. I said, you throw the disc in the shot? He said, no. He said, I run the dashes. I said, what kind of time? He says, 9.5. I said, about your education. He said, well, I wasn't graduated as well as I might have been. I was salutatorian. Well, after Dizzy and I had looked that up, I said, no. I said, young man, don't you have some human frailty, some weakness so that you can play with the White Sox? And he looked at me a second and says, there is one thing. I says, what's that? He says, I'm a liar. and I signed him. Now, I would like to, in closing, to just mention a couple of things that I think are most important. You have, for instance, in Minneapolis, a gentleman who got himself into considerable hot water writing a letter. It's reminiscent of Mr. Truman and the piano player. It takes a great deal of courage for Mr. Cott to write a letter, and yet it seems to me that he has a right to write it, and it is a brave and courageous and good thing to do. Mr. Brosnan in Chicago used to write some columns, and in Cincinnati. He went from Cincinnati to Chicago because he wrote columns. He is now a full-time writer because he wrote columns. And yet there should be room, and there should be the right of everyone to express their opinions and to have the opinion considered, rather than whether or not Johnny Sane should have been fired by Sam Mealy or anything else. The opinion's the important thing. It takes a great deal of courage to speak out, to say what you want to say. Remember, it is maybe not always expedient, seldom wise, but it should be done. And whether I happen to be very fond of Sam Mealy and less fond of Mr. Sane, but yet I find my admiration for Mr. Cott surpassing all of those. So remember that when you get into a jam, that the easy way out is not always the intelligent way out. Now, if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask, I'd be delighted to try and answer them. Well, this has been a very comprehensive talk. And if you won't ask any questions, then I'll answer some of my own. The Minneapolis Twins are going to have trouble again next year. I asked myself the question, how are they going to finish? Third, primarily because they need a couple more pitchers. They need one outfielder that can hit, and they're going to need a catcher. I happen to think that Earl Batty is one of the remarkable performers. I showed that by trading him to Washington. Bill DeWitt, in trading Mr. Robinson to Baltimore, took me off the hook as the fellow who had made the worst deal in record. I traded Mr. Batty to the Twins, then the Senators, for... well, actually, I didn't quite trade Batty for Siebers. I sent Mincher along to carry the $125,000. And I can only remember the remark that Earl made when I walked on the field last year, just in the day before the World Series. He said, he rushed over. He said, I want to thank you for having made this all possible. But you're going to need another catcher, not to replace him, but as an adjunct to him. And the Brooklyn Club, actually, just give me a second. The Orioles have probably done the greatest favor to baseball in recent history in winning the World Series. They have reestablished the American League as a major league. In the average mind, the American League had fallen somewhere between the Pacific Coast League and the Southern Association. And it was important that they reestablish this, not only from the standpoint of keeping the league's attendance going, but also because we like to have a conflict between our two leagues, and we like to feel that they're on a parity. And this victory was very important to baseball in general. It was also important in a kind of an obscure way to the United States in that it avoided an international incident. You see, originally the Pittsburgh Pirates were going to go to Japan, tour Japan this fall, and then Mr. O'Malley decided that he would rather go, and strange enough, Mr. Eckert agreed with him, or is it strange? And so the Dodgers were going. Now, had they not been shut out 3 of their 4 games, when they got to Japan, I'm afraid that the Japanese people would have looked on them as imposters. Because now they have seen that they can't score on foreign soil in the United States. They are perfectly willing to accept them as Dodgers, even though the Japanese shut them out half the time in Japan. And so the Japanese diplomats will not be able to call on our State Department and accuse us of having sent over some imitation club, probably with a made in Japan label. So it is important that the Orioles win in 4 straight. And it was, as I say, a very dull series, but it did achieve a tremendous purpose. It reestablished the American League. Now, do you have any more questions? Well, in that case, I shall thank you for having been a very kind audience, and certainly the most attractive that I have appeared before in a long time. It's nice to get up in the morning and find that there are other people who have been doing this for some years. This is one of my early experiments, and I hope that I can come back again sometime, although I do hope it's at a more reasonable hour. Thank you.